Okay, welcome back to the final session of day one, the power of cross-training. We are presenting this session in a slightly different format from the previous two. And our hope is really for this to be a bit more of an interactive exercise and for all of us to be able to engage in more discussion and provide more opportunity for everyone to participate. So we look forward to a lot more questions, a lot more conversation for this final segment. Before we begin, another friendly reminder that all views shared at this session are those of our presenters and do not represent the official position nor policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. You have this as kind of housekeeping rules. If anyone has any issues, please feel free to reach out to Philip. So it is my distinct privilege to introduce our speakers for today. They'll spend some time talking more about their experiences in a couple slides down, but I want to first introduce Candace Heisler. Candace served as the Assistant District Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, worked there for over 25 years, during which time she headed the domestic violence, charging misdemeanor and preliminary hearing units. She has taught in many academic settings for more than 20 years, written for and trained a variety of professionals about elder abuse, domestic violence, and collaborative responses. So welcome, Candace. Next, we have Lisa Rachmuth, Program Administrator with the Center for Elder Abuse Solutions at Weill Cornell Medicine. You heard Lisa open the session this afternoon. Lisa oversees the Center for Elder Abuse Solutions programs, including 5 New York City E-MDTs, the New York State Helpline for Concerned Persons, and sees TA offerings through the New York State E-MDT Initiative and National Center. Lisa joins us with extensive experience working with and training on systems, communities, and individuals impacted by domestic violence and elder abuse. Rounding up our panel is Commander Jordan Satinsky. Jordan has served as an investigator in homicide, adult sex crimes, child sex, physical crimes, elder vulnerable adult abuse, and domestic violence. He has a really illustrious career in Montgomery County Police Department, started the sex crimes section, redeveloped the domestic violence unit, and reinitiated the elder vulnerable adult investigative section. He is now assigned to MCPD's 1st District Patrol Station and works very closely with various professionals in elder and vulnerable adult abuse protection. So we welcome everyone, all speakers, to this session. We thought we might start first with, the whole purpose of thinking about, I'm sorry, it's just kind of going through what today's learning objectives are. They are to understand the benefits of cross-disciplinary training, identify what other disciplines are looking out for trainings from the E-MDT, and hopefully point everyone to some resources or guidance around thinking about the development and utilization of training materials. We thought we might start out by just going through a working definition of what we mean by cross-training and why we're emphasizing cross-training, which is distinct from just the primary idea of training to begin with. For us, cross-training involves really involving learning skills and knowledge from different roles and disciplines. And we think of these in 2 buckets of work. One, it is training designed for participants from multiple disciplines. Quite similar to what we're doing today, all of you join us with very different professional affiliations, different perspectives. So this is what we also mean by cross-training. And then the other bucket of content that we're interested in when we think about cross-training is training content that covers the work of other agencies. So that idea of being familiar with someone else's work and the parameters by which they operate is what we're prioritizing in this instance. many of you have had some experience with cross-training. And we think of this in terms of the following benefits. One is it allows us to think holistically and apply holistically um, the our analysis of cases and the idea of what interventions can take place and how to prioritize those interventions. We're seeing things from multiple perspectives. One other benefit is around adaptability. We're able to apply knowledge from other disciplines and also innovation, right? This idea of thinking beyond just the boundaries of or confines of our work to other ways in which a protection case or an abuse case could be intervened and kept safe. So I want to hand some time to uh, our esteemed speakers for today, just to share more about their work and their experience of cross-training. I provided them with 3 key prompts, just talking about their experience as trainers, their thoughts around the value of cross-training from their experiences, and one memory or event that demonstrates for them the impact of cross-training. We'll start perhaps with Candace, if you can get us started, please go ahead.
Thank you, Grace, and good afternoon to everyone. Hello from the West Coast. I see some familiar names on the list, and I'm so happy that you're part of this discussion. In terms of my background, Grace gave you a thumbnail example of what I've done, but I spent 25 years as a prosecutor, and in that stead, I work closely with affiliated agencies, including Adult Protective Services and law enforcement, as well as with the courts. As head of our domestic violence unit, that's where we started handling elder abuse cases. And this is going back a ways. For the last 4+ decades, I've done a lot of training, both interdisciplinary and intradisciplinary. So I have sat where some of you sit, putting together training that will serve a variety of disciplines, learning about each other. These include law enforcement, prosecution, protective services, healthcare, judges, and so on. I thought a lot about the question of how do we demonstrate the impact of cross-training. And I'm going to cheat a little, Grace, because I want to share 2 memories. The first was where I was conducting a cross-training, and in this case, it was a cross-training on undue influence. And I was speaking as a representative of the criminal justice system, helping APS understand what prosecutors needed in order to go forward with matters that looked like undue influence. I might also add that my state doesn't have an undue influence crime, so it became extra confusing because APS has language about undue influence, while the criminal code does not. And one of the things I asked early on is, what are your challenges in these cases? Where are the places where you're feeling frustrated? And one that came up quite quickly was that they felt, these are APS professionals, that cases that should be prosecuted were not. As we worked our way through the material, we talked about the rules of the criminal justice system, things like our language, the language of crimes, and also burdens of proof in order to file and prosecute a case. Partway through that, I had more than one APS worker come up to me and say, "Stop, I've already gotten so much out of this training in the first hour because I now understand why my cases aren't going anywhere." The problem is I'm not talking about it in language that's understood by the justice system. And secondly, I didn't know about the burden of proof. So I think that's one example of how cross-training can really change the landscape for multiple systems. And having access to people from multiple systems can really enrich the conversation and find some common grounds. The second example is one where I had an MDT form around me to educate me. And I look back with a little bit of humor and a lot of grace The people who approached me were wonderful, and they were gentle and they were understanding, and they tried to meet me where I was. So I had a case that had gone to a law enforcement agency. The agency representative was not well trained in elder abuse, and especially some of the concepts that were present in this particular case. The case languished because there just wasn't the right information forthcoming. The head of the San Francisco then multidisciplinary team, which has now grown to three different and distinct teams, called me and said, "Welcome to elder abuse. We're concerned about this particular case, and we'd really like you to come to our MDT so we can talk with you about it." And I said, "I don't know much about the case, but sure, I'll go to the MDT." I arrived at the MDT, and to my amazement, there were about 20 different professionals there waiting. Each one was hanging onto a file. And in very short order, what I found is while I knew almost nothing about my case, let alone that it was prosecutable, these people had all the information, the background, the expertise, the records, and the interest in helping me build that case. And as I left that meeting, I was struck by the power of cross-disciplinary training, and grateful that our MDT had reached out in this way because I became their trainee. And then I became a member. So those are my examples of the impact of cross-training.
Thank you, Candace. And this is a perfect reminder of how cross-training can take place informally and formally, right? Thank you. I'm gonna turn to Lisa now, just to share her experience.
Thank you, Grace. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and so many powerful colleagues in this room. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you all for putting this together and making this a wonderful conference. Um, I it's something to talk about cross training is almost like talking about, did you take a shower today? It is something that is so now ingrained in my being and in the work that we do. As as CEASE has grown over the years, we've worked with so many professionals along the way to learn how to do the work from everyone's perspective, how to respect the work that other people do. That's very different than me as a social worker was trained to do. And I think there are so many benefits to cross training. I think about the enhanced case management, improving collaboration and trust, increasing your knowledge and efficiency. Support is just so key to how we are able to cross disciplines and understand the power of what the other person does and then support them through the work, because this is tough work. We find that we have better outcomes for victims when we work collaboratively, but also we work across different disciplines. We build a cohort of professionals who have similar interests in helping vulnerable older adults from those different disciplines. And finally, enhancing our own professional growth and opening your professional world to other areas of work. And I too have two memories that I'm going to share. Sorry, Grace. Sorry, Phil. Sorry, Lisa. But my first memory is a memory of something that happened actually last week. We were in a team meeting, and one of our team members started talking about someone coming in and doing a training for our team. And we started to talk about, well, while they're doing the training for our team, we could also do a training for their team. So we could share the resources at the same time. We don't have to have two separate trainings. We can do this together. And then we can also come together and understand how to best serve those vulnerable older adults that we're talking about. So it became just kind of organic how we began to speak about doing this cross training. We never mentioned the words cross training. We just said we could train one another and we could share our experiences of training one another in that way. My second example is personal, and it takes me back to when I was a fairly new social worker in New York City. I was working in foster care, and I had the opportunity through my work to attend a lot of different trainings. I was very surprised at some of the speakers that were at one of these conferences that I went to. And one of them was the newly appointed NYPD domestic violence police officer. And she began speaking about, she was a detective, she began speaking about the domestic violence work from her perspective and how she really was approaching victims and survivors and their children. And I worked with the children, so that was very interesting to me. I had not worked specifically in domestic violence before, but I learned so much from hearing about how someone else was able to do this work that I became very interested in it and began to explore how to do more work in domestic violence and move that into the ethos of everything I was doing with regard to working with children in foster care and then moving on to working with survivors of domestic violence and their children, and then moving into elder abuse. So kind of organically this happened, but it really became the building blocks. And it wouldn't have happened if there wasn't that cross-training experience for me. So I personally really value cross-training and the importance of it. And learning things from someone else's perspective has been just mind-blowing for me. And also, it keeps you on your toes. So thank
Thank
you.
you.
I turn it
Thank you,
over to you.
Lisa. Jordan, go ahead.
Thanks, Grace. And Candace and Lisa stole all my good lines, so I don't have anything now. But so again, my name's Jordan Satinsky. Thank you all for coming. I have also, like the other two, I've seen a lot of familiar names in here. I'm glad to see you again. As far as the trainer is concerned, I've worked at the university level as well as for Department of Justice, Department of State, and had the opportunity to work all over the world talking about not only this, but some other areas that I specialize in. Um, the elder abuse area kind of came to me by accident. I was a homicide investigator, and it's my last case. I'm kind of skipping right down to the bottom here to tie it all together. My last case was a gentleman who had died at home, had basically stopped taking care of him. And when I tried to get assistance after he passed away from our APS units, I was unable to do so because at the time, nobody talked. Nobody was interested in it. We had a really good relationship in our domestic violence world and our child abuse world. But in this world, nobody talked. The laws were different, much like the previous examples earlier that Candace gave of people not understanding or not having the laws that were in place. They had rules, but they didn't have laws on the criminal side to assist. So that case took 3.5 years to finally finish. When I became a sergeant and moved into the elder abuse unit, this is one of the things I really wanted to fix, this relationship. And actually, within the first year, I got very lucky and met with the chief administrative officer of our adult protective services. And we created a brand new working relationship where all we did was get together and cross-train. And that really led us to our first major case, which was another homicide case, which we ended up solving in 3 months versus the 2.5 years. And we utilized all of this wonderful expertise that they had. Excuse me, I'm sorry, that I had none of. Neither did my people. Our folks are really good at talking to suspects. We are not good at talking to victims sometimes. And we didn't have a good way to talk to elder or vulnerable adult abuse victims. I had never had the opportunity to even write the word decubitus ulcer anywhere in a police report. And now I was learning how to do it pretty quickly, and I got the little red line quite a bit. But I started to lean on our social workers to interview our victims while we stood next to them and took down notes. And then we traded, where they would come in with us while we were interviewing suspects and let us know, hey, you're going to want to ask about X or Y. Or they'd feed into a mic in our ear for that so we could build our cases out. And our cases really changed. We went from doing about 13 or so of these types of cases a year, meaning elder abuse cases, to on an average, we do about 150. I left the unit in 2018 when I got promoted to lieutenant and left. And since that time, they're still running about the same amount of calls for service, same amount of investigations with that same group, and it's grown. APS now has 3 different investigative units that handle just this, down up from 1, and our investigators are up from 2 up to 5. So it really has grown, and we do a lot of continued cross training together, and it's just so valuable. I can't even tell you how highly I speak of it. The cross training means everything. The working together means everything. Those silos are the biggest hindrance we have to all of our work, and that's something I've become a firm believer in, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan. So we want to hear from you now. And what we are going to do is do this in 2 parts. One is we will be sending everyone to smaller breakouts. So we're a pretty large group here. So we wanted everyone to have an opportunity to share more about your experience around cross training. If you've attempted it before, what success did you experience? What do you think helped that experience, and what was the key challenge? If you have not attempted cross training before, why? And we also want to hear from you around what those key challenges were. So Phil, in a minute, will send everyone to smaller groups. We'll give everyone 8 minutes to just talk through these questions. We're really just interested in everyone's experiences. If we could also have someone in your group just kind of be scribe and take notes for just the general conversation and the salient points that arise in your discussions. We're going to invite a few teams to share their experiences when we come back to the main group. You will also see our speakers kind of pop in and out to your sessions. They may be there. And that's just for us to be able to get a sense of what everyone is talking about, and how to kind of curate the content for the next when everyone comes back. At this time, I also want to introduce Lisa Furr, who is supporting us in this session today. Lisa is also working with us at the National Center. She works with Lifespan of Greater Rochester. I'm very grateful that she's helping me just kind of monitor the chat and help us organize some of the conversations around the discussion later. So, Phil, I think we're ready to send everyone. We'll see you all in 8 minutes. Okay, so we have a lot of time now just to hear more about what went on in your sessions. I'm going to turn to Lisa, who will facilitate this next segment.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, everyone. I heard some really interesting conversations in a couple of the breakout groups that I popped into. So thank you for your participation, and thank you for being part of this wonderful activity. I hope everyone was able to participate and learn from one another a little bit and answer some of the questions. So I'd like to open it up for anyone who wants to share the responses that you have to some of the prompts that we gave you. First prompt, can everyone see them in the chat? First prompt was, what's been your experience around cross training? Second one, if you've attempted it before, what were the successes that you experienced? What helped? What was key challenge? And the third one was, if you have not attempted it before, why? What is the key challenge? So anyone, or I'll start calling on groups. Maggie's shaking her head. She's like, she knows this routine.
I can speak. I'm Lisa Stern. I work for a nonprofit in Long Island, New York, and we oversee our E-MDT. Arlene Markarian is our chief there, running the E-MDT, and I think we do a lot of cross training through the E-MDT, and some other people in our group also the same. So different members present about their programs and how they work and how they interact. And there's an opportunity for everybody to ask questions and get to know each other more and see things from different perspectives. And I think that's been really great. I think in our group, there was a little bit of talk about APS and how that has evolved. And for our group, it's been great. I think that we have improved that connection, and it's part through small group meetings after the E-MDT in between, where we're following up on cases and where, interdisciplinary groups are meeting to follow up on the action plan. So I think that's been really great, and we're learning how each person works. I think the district attorney's office is where we get most of our referrals. And I was saying that sometimes it helped to communicate, better, that sometimes, we're there to protect the victim. And sometimes the DA's office is there to prosecute, and that's not really what the victim wants in a lot of times, because it's usually their adult child that is 90% of the time the perpetrator. So we try to help support the victim to get there where they need to do something to protect themselves, and we safety plan with them. But it's not always, sometimes we're not aligned in what we want to see happen. But the different perspectives that we've been exposed to have helped us both work collaboratively in a positive way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. Who else would like to share? Maggie keeps looking at me.
I mean, I can go. I like to chit chat.
Thank you.
That was the quickest 8 minutes, so we did not get as detailed as I think we wanted to. But first, we start off with Chris from Pikes Peak, and he talked about how before every meeting, they'll spend 15 to 30 minutes having each organization present, and they have 18 organizations, and it goes very successfully. I asked, because he's been doing it for 3 years, if they present the same thing, and sometimes they do as like a little refresher, but sometimes they present on some other stuff of like updates and programming and that type of thing. Heather was literally talking as it ended. And I have a quote. So Heather from North Carolina, she talked about that they do a lot of joint investigation. So it just organically takes place during their case review, that they'll do cross training, part of the case discussion. And then we also had Sophia from Live Safe, but her mic didn't work. So she was typing away, and then the 8 minutes ended. So it was very quick. But that's the update from everyone.
Thanks, Maggie. Thank you. Who else would like to share from their group?
I'll share.
Thanks, Arlene.
So I was on with Tashika and with Lisa, and it's funny because Tashika's is from APS in White Plains, and Lisa is law enforcement from Kansas, so she got stuck with two New Yorkers. So we were talking, and I know that Lisa had indicated she agreed with this, with doing what my boss Lisa just said about doing things during an E-MDT, so that we share information about each other. And one of the things I shared was that, everybody thinks, when you think APS, APS is the repository of all things elder abuse. Everybody calls APS for every single thing. And then they have to sift through all that. And they have very strict criteria. That's statutory. But the thing is that a lot of us really didn't understand it. And then during the MDT, I call them mini showcases. I want somebody to give a team member to give a mini showcase. And when APS, discussed exactly what, not only what they can take, but what they can't take, which I think is just as important, so that people understand that there are certain kinds of cases they can't take. And that really helped a lot. Lisa, I think you remember that day. It's like everybody was asking questions. And everybody was like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And I really think it helped the team together, including APS, who, can get very, very cautious about about working with teams, because they're constantly getting smacked around. I don't know how else to say it, but that's, so I think that gave us, now everybody understood. And now the other day, I was just so happy. Our APS supervisor, we were introducing ourselves for a new team member, and she's like, and I really like being on this team. And I'm like, oh. So if you understand each other's jobs, I think that's the most really important thing for the team.
Thanks for sharing that, Arlene. And I think you're really highlighting a very, very important part of cross training, and that is respect for other people's work and what they do and how they can do it, because we all can't do everything all the time. So thank you so much for sharing, all of you for sharing all of those. Anyone else want to share what they talked about in their group? Anyone talk at all about not having tried cross training? Did that come up in any group?
Yeah, it came up in my group.
Oh, please share.
So in our group, we were kind of discussing, the difficulties when people are kind of siloed and they only look at things from the perspective of siloed. And I had mentioned how I tend to not do cross trainings. I just come educated on other people's disciplines so that when someone kind of has a standoffish reaction, like hypothetically to APS, and the common thing is people will say like, well, APS doesn't do anything. And I'll have to go through and I'll say, well, they have, the 3 guidelines that they have to follow. So if we're looking at it from the standpoint of this case, none of those guidelines are fulfilled through what the case involves. Therefore, they can't do anything. But we can certainly look at different avenues, moving forward, just to kind of like not bring conflict, because, I'm on a team and I don't like conflict. But it ends up being a lot of times like kind of ego stroking in certain ways, just so that people realize that they're all there for the same purpose. And by cross training them, like in a bigger group, I worry that they will check out. But that is because of the like I have a lot of rural counties, and then I have like one big not rural county. And in the very rural counties, if you're not from there, they don't listen to you. So anybody that's coming in from an outside county, including me, they're like, well, you're from the big city. And I made the joke. I was like, dude, I'm in Binghamton. This is not metropolis here. So, but that's, kind of where we were headed in that conversation. But like Maggie said, 8 minutes goes fast.
It does. It does. Well, thank you for sharing. Kimberly, I think you put your hand up before.
Yeah, so it's
Thank you.
kind of a little bit on the same lines as Rebecca, but um, I was having the conversation, and then Commander Stansky had popped in, and it was kind of a perfect time popping in because I was speaking on um, getting law enforcement more engaged with some of my teams. And I mean, we've had law enforcement on all of the teams, but it's never consistent on several of them. So how to go about getting them, um, invested, and hoping it's the person that does get invested, if they happen to be, if they leave and are transferred, they're excited enough about it to want someone else to step in. But you were just saying, he was explaining to me that trying different things, like not calling or emailing, but just showing up. And I think, that makes me a little bit nervous, but I don't see why I can't do that. So I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to speak on, or, you know, anything of that nature. Uh, so yeah, that was kind of where our conversation went.
Yeah, to kind of expand on your point, Kimberly. Yeah, just showing up. I was telling her group, my world is not fax, email, phone calls. We do everything in person because 911 happens or we have to go to a scene or whatever. Nothing's emailed. And when we were first starting up my unit and working with elder abuse, I couldn't, and I'm not trying to offend any of my APS workers here. I couldn't get anybody from APS on the phone at all. So as I was telling Kimberly, I put a uniform on for the first time in 15 years or 10 years at that time, and just walked over to their office because nobody stops a guy in uniform, right? So I just walked in and started knocking on doors until I found the right guy. I think they just got tired of me, but that helped a lot to create those relationships. And I will tell you, law enforcement will 100% respect that from anyone who just shows up and say, "Hey, I really want to kind of create this relationship." Because if you do it at the regular meeting, it's expected. Everybody knows that. But you do it on your off, you do it when it's not in that scope and you're just like, hey, I'm looking for Sheriff XYZ. I'd like to chat more about this, and here's why. And as I was saying to Kimberly, especially in an election year, sheriffs love to be out in the media and doing things. Use it. I mean, I hate to say it, but use it. Domestic violence in the late 90s, early 2000s was marketed like crazy all over the place, and everybody got onto it. We are at the precipice for that for elder abuse. Market it. I mean, I hate to say this, but get out there and just keep talking about it, and it becomes part of the regular fold. I mean, Lisa Furr and most of the folks on this call tell you, 10 years ago, would we be having this call? Grace, I don't think this job existed 10 years ago. That's where we're going. So yes, the more in-person stuff you can do, especially for folks like me in costume, as we are very much a paramilitary organization, once you get to the top part of it, it'll start filtering down. And you will start getting those people that are excited to do things and moving forward. So yeah, good talk, Kimberly. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, everyone who participated in this activity and for sharing. And hopefully you had a chance to get to know someone in your group who was maybe outside of your area of expertise. And maybe you did a couple of minutes of cross training already. So thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Grace.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for your sharing. If you want to continue that conversation, our chat is still open. So if you heard something that you want others to know about that showed up in your conversation, please feel free to use the chat. We're going to move into a bit more of a thematic conversation. So this team has met twice now, and kind of exchange ideas on email about, how to focus the attention on cross training and what would it take for us to mount successful and sustainable trainings. One of the things that, kind of we emerged, we wanted to prioritize was just understanding how do we make this pitch for the value of cross training, right? What would entice folks to even begin thinking about this value? Like what could a value proposition look like? So I want to invite any members of the panel to kind of chime in on, what their thoughts are around how to make this pitch as an offering to other agencies. Go ahead, Jordan.
Sorry, I was trying to get off you. Sorry about that. I think especially for law enforcement, having understanding and that cross training is so important. And that's something that I pitched with my bosses quite a bit. I joked earlier about the cubitus ulcer. I honestly had to look it up online. I didn't know what it was. And, but there's all these other terms I didn't understand, and I didn't understand how they played into it. And I use the example of our sexual assault nursing examiner, where I used to sit down with my detectives once a month with them and going over terminology, going over things to create that understanding so we could speak in court and we were able to put the right person away. And we're able to limit the amount of times we're interviewing our victim because now we have the experts together. So those are the kind of things that I pitched out to start doing this. And the end result was a return on investment. We're lowering overtime, not going out as much. Let's be realistic. For my folks, that's what I have to play to, as is some of our other governmental entities. We're getting higher arrest rates. We're getting higher prosecutions. This brings more bodies into it. This brings more people and more focus. So that's where I sat on it as far as trying to pitch it and move it forward, was a marketing strategy and a return on investment.
And Candace, I know you also have kind of a thought around the languaging around training, like who it's for, and how do you even make a case for a group like judges, where training feels like a very foreign term.
So I want to answer that in a couple of different ways, I think. I think I'm going to put talking about training judges just to the side for just a minute.
Please.
I think some of the reasons that people want to get cross training is because they've tried things that just plain didn't work and they weren't happy with outcomes. And so one of the things about cross training is it allows you to say, how do we broaden the options so that whether we're focusing on the victim or we're focusing on the perpetrator, we have a broader range of options, some of which may actually bring a victim more interested in seeing a system work in ways they didn't. Some of it is getting people to see what their piece of this elder abuse puzzle is. There are lots of agencies that work with older adults who don't see themselves as part of elder abuse. But when it comes to strategies around how do we make this a safer community for older adults to live in, how do we reduce the amount of abuse that is coming forth, even though we know it's grossly underreported, reaching those other agencies can really open doors. And so I think one of the ways you communicate about why cross-training is important is to increase understanding and to broaden the range of options. So we're starting in the criminal justice system to look at new options, restorative justice, for example. That has never been part of the language of criminal justice around elder abuse. But now it's a discussion. As an example, in my state, it's actually built into the criminal statutes that we have to talk about RJ, which means we have to develop relationships, we have to have understanding. And the beauty of that is it may align really well with what people who are being harmed are saying to their advocates or saying to APS, saying to healthcare, so that it's not an all or nothing. It's not he goes to jail or nothing happens. So it's those things. I think it also refocuses the discussion within groups that already see themselves as part of the elder abuse community. So many times we focus and come to a conclusion, why isn't X doing their job? Why aren't they taking this seriously? Why don't they do anything? And I think cross-training not only broadens the discussion into, oh, there are reasons that this doesn't fit their guidelines, but maybe there's somebody else whose guidelines allow for this intervention. The other is I think it refocuses from why isn't X doing their job to are there systemic reasons that a desired result isn't happening? And when you can elevate it from personalities to systems, you have a very different opportunity and you have lots more opportunities for solutions. I'm going to now sort of pivot and talk a little bit about working with the judiciary. The members of the panel know that I do a fair amount of judicial training, and I have learned a lot from those trainings. And so let me just make a few observations. I'm hoping that your various E-MDTs see a role to work with the judiciary. Now, it's not going to be around case review. Judges can't sit in while you discuss a case that is alive or may come before them. They can't be there. So think about other things. How about procedures that might be helpful for older litigants? What about exposing remedies that maybe the court doesn't offer at this time, but the community might? What about creating bridges for self-help centers at the judicial level that many courts have, and making sure materials work for older victims, and also thinking about what do judges really need to know? There are areas of elder abuse that everybody, including judges, needs to know. And I'll give you just a couple of thoughts that I had. Dementia. What is it? What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of a person's ability to share what has happened to them, to come to court, to seek a civil remedy, to testify? That crosses so many different disciplines, including the judiciary. Capacity and consent concepts. Again, so many areas of law that intersect with a variety of providers. In terms of specifically focusing on judges, focus on what they can do, not what they can't. So I've highlighted they can't come to case review. They can't lobby as well, but they certainly can provide information about a better way to navigate elder abuse cases, or be open to, let's rethink, do we perhaps want to set up an elder abuse calendar for those specific ones? Do we want to draw from some of what we've learned in domestic violence and create either a calendar or even a court for older adults, whether it's a civil matter or a criminal matter or even a probate matter. Judges have to maintain an aura of impartiality, which means when you're thinking about engaging with them, are you doing it through a spokesperson who's seen as neutral? When I was a prosecutor, I couldn't really do judicial training. When I took off my prosecutor hat and retired and became just someone who knew something about elder abuse, all of a sudden I was available. And that's because I didn't have the label of being part of a particular system. So if you're conducting a training, thinking about who do you want to train with, matching a court officer with a subject matter expert is very powerful training. Please don't tell judges how to decide cases, because what you want to do is give them the tools to make informed judgments. And you also want to think with your speaker, is this someone they're likely to have come before them? Those are just some caveats and things to think about, but there is a really good reason to engage with the judiciary.
Thanks, Candy. I think that what you've just shared, I'm moving in a few different directions. One is this case for cross-training is a function of a case for collaboration, right? Like this idea of there being an impetus for us to be able to work together to collaborate on cases that and the training really is a function of being able to get there and making sure that everyone is able to get there in the same way, and addressing any gaps that might be either in terms of knowledge or skills or just in intervening in cases. The other piece that you talked about, which was more in relation to judges, in some ways also applies to everyone. No one wants to be told how to do their job, and everyone comes into the work feeling like they're impartial, and there's a way in which the system is the parameters of their work does not allow us to be influenced by other professional and other professional inputs insofar as the realm of our expertise is. So I think part of that negotiation and being attentive to those things are important highlights for the work that we're doing in terms of cross training. Lisa, we haven't heard from you. Anything around the goals alignment and pitching for cross training that you can think of?
Well, I think one of the key things, and this really piggybacks on, I think about this all the time, helping other professionals really wrap their heads around what some of the other people on the MDT do and how they do it. And really thinking about their mandates, thinking about not just their goals, but the policies of their organizations and their agencies and how they must operate. But people don't know that just because I say I'm an APS worker or I say I work for Weill Cornell Medicine. That doesn't mean anything to people. You really have to explain to them what you do, how you do it, and then why you do it that way. And sometimes that gets a little convoluted, but you often get a lot of support when you're trying to explain the differences between, say, being able to serve someone if they don't have capacity, but if they decide they don't want your service, you can't force your service on them. And a lot of that comes about in the way that we explain our roles to other people. We explain what our agency does, what our organization mandates are, and then take it even further, what the policies and laws behind that are in order to support the work. And just thinking about social service law in New York State, it's hefty, but it's fairly clear with regard to who you serve and how you serve them. And there is separation of a lot of the services. I think also we have um, we have access to really be able to deliver services to people where they can also access multiple disciplines in some of our settings. I think about our FJCs, our family justice centers throughout the state. And those family justice centers bring together a whole bunch of professionals from different perspectives to be able to serve the survivor or if the victim. Um, but they don't always know what the person who sits in the office next door does. So sometimes there's the informal cross training. What do you do? How do you do it? Oh, I do this, and this is how I serve people. And it becomes much more of that informal connection that can be formalized down the road. And I think there's a lot of power in being able to do that um, with professionals. But I also think that there's the end result is what we always have to think about. How does it best benefit the vulnerable older adult that we're serving? And how can we, as the professionals that are charged with providing a service, whatever our service is, get to that point? And I certainly can't do it alone. I certainly don't have the knowledge base, the bandwidth, or the ability to bring all of that to one person or any group of people. It takes a village. And understanding that and being able to tap into your resources to help move that case along is just paramount. And it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to sometimes connect it. But once you begin to get it, and once you begin to do it, as Jordan was saying, you walk into the offices. Once you become comfortable with that aspect of it, other things begin to flow. And it takes practice, and sometimes it takes also potentially a little bit of failure. And then you go back to the drawing board and try it again. All right, so they didn't like me showing up like that. So how can I show up differently? How can I present what I'm here to do differently? The other thing that I will say is if you start out almost all of your reasons for wanting cross training with to serve the people that we are charged with serving, you get buy-in. There's that ultimate passion to really do the job and do what you want to do, and then having open ears and listening. So I can't do this because it's not within my expertise or my realm, but I do know someone who can. So I'm not a geriatrician, but I know a geriatrician. I can't, what was the Jordan, what was the diagnosis that you had to find out about?
It had to deal with the decubitus ulcer, something I will
Okay.
never forget again.
Yeah. I can't, I work for a medical institution. I can't tell you what that is, but I know someone who can. And that's the whole circle of cross training.
So, Lisa, I've heard you talk about, I mean, just kind of point to a natural setting where cross-training can take place because agencies are working together and FGC is a setting. Within this conversation, we've also talked about just kind of the impetus for cross-training when we're in a network of discussing a case, right? This idea of in preparation for this case, I need to know these things. Can you all think of any other more like natural settings, the E-MDT, of course, being a very natural one. Yeah, are there other natural settings where this convergence of professions is there where we could tap on if we wanted to say just show up and be able to talk with a whole bunch of professionals involved in a case?
I mean, I work for a medical institution. I think of an emergency room as one of those settings.
Right.
I mean, you have security, you have police, you have nurses, and nurses and doctors are not the same. You have social work. You sometimes, and you have families who are the experts in their own situations. You have the older adult. You have a whole bunch of people to tap into who have different areas of expertise to really rely on. And it happens organically.
Right.
Someone's asking someone one question to understand how this can move through a system. You have care providers. So that's one really kind of natural setting that we have happen with these kinds of things. Uh, I don't know how many people here have been to an FJC, have experienced what can happen in an FJC, the power of all of those professionals being able to sit together in the same environment and talk about their different roles. So that's a really great setting to have kind of happen for people to be able to understand the roles of others.
Can I add on to Lisa's point real quick?
Please.
I completely agree with you. It's amazing. When we sat down and had to share a wall with the prosecutor, victim advocate, and APS agents, it totally changed how we all viewed each other. And rather than, again, going back to the phone or anything else, I could just walk next door and find out. We could have real-time discussions about cases. We could do this all together. And it was, as much as it was a small outlay of cash that no one wants to hear about to rent space in the beginning, and we had to put some of our egos aside to get into these spaces, it has done nothing but added a huge return on investment for all the agencies involved in Montgomery County, Maryland.
And there are variations of the family justice model. So don't forget, forensic centers can do similar functions. They may not carry the same names, and some of the players might be different, but it has that same concept of bringing professionals together to think about a case and to try to resolve it in a way that's helpful to the person who's being harmed. And Jordan, on to your point, there are some agencies around the state where APS, law enforcement, and prosecutor are somewhat co-located, even if it's not in a center. I know some are in police agencies, I know some are in APS agencies, but these are natural, informal opportunities to really build those kinds of bridges of understanding and collaboration.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, go ahead.
This was something, this came up last week. I heard this and I had to ask more questions about it. One of the schools of social work here in New York City is exploring doing a track on social workers and politicians. So really formalizing a little bit more of that bridge between the social worker who becomes the politician or works politically within a system. And it's a very interesting kind of way of thinking about this because I've never thought about me or my profession as politicians, and that scares me. But it is a way to think about how we are bridging an understanding of difference, similarity, but also an understanding of how our bigger systems operate, because sometimes it's just baffling. So helpful in that perspective.
Thank you. And I see that we have a question from Bessie. They ask, could you speak to how cross-training could help manage expectations of team members?
So I can take this one, unless Candace, you want to grab it.
Why don't you go first, and if I think of
Okay.
anything, I'll jump in.
Okay, so Bessie, for our agency, when the chief prosecutor happened to be my line prosecutor in child abuse when I went over there, she was now in charge. One of the things we did when we started doing the cross training between the prosecutors, the police, the sheriffs, and APS was everybody was in the same room learning everything, and we were getting all the same information. From there, she actually hired a program manager to manage specific elder and vulnerable abuse attorneys in this based on those trainings. And those, from my understanding, were put into their expectations as far as their yearly performance plans. Like, you had to understand this, you had to attend trainings, you had to provide training. So it kind of became a whole holistic thing. It took a while to figure out, and we made a lot of mistakes. But in the end, by just getting everyone in the same room and starting to write those things down and making it part of their rating plans, which is what I did with my detectives as well, it really did start benchmarking to create that track for that specific area, like you would for a financial crimes attorney or detective, or a child abuse attorney or detective. It started creating those steps.
And
I
the
Go
thought
ahead.
that jumped into my head, and I completely love what Jordan just talked about at the institutional level, because I think top-down organizations, and I'm thinking of many different criminal justice type agencies, you have to have something that embodies what the expectations are for it to have life and to have legs and to be institutionalized. It doesn't happen informally in any predictable way for the long term. I also think at a different level, starting by exploring with different parts of your community, what is their understanding of roles? What is it that they would like to see happen? Whether that's by using a case study or by using neutral examples. This isn't about you didn't do your job. This is about expectations around we don't know how to talk to law enforcement. You know, dispatchers hang up on us. We can't get past the front door of the prosecutor's office because we don't know how to talk to them. It's figuring out what those expectations are, and then having someone from that discipline talk about what they really can and can't do, and also create solutions. Sometimes it's giving someone a phone number and saying, if you're having a problem with the case, you can call me. That's sort of an informal way. And then within those institutions, you start building the more permanent solutions. So it doesn't depend on Mary Jones being in the office on that Friday afternoon at 5:15.
On a team level, I also think that by having a rotating schedule of your core members present on their organization, what they do, how they do it, their mission, how they serve the population that your team serves. So being very specific about their mandates of what they can do and what they cannot do. And speaking to what they do in those situations where they cannot intercede or they can't work with the older adult in that situation. So, what do they do in those situations and how do they help get services to the older adult? I think speaking very directly to those situations can help people understand and respect their role. Everyone works within, the policies and mandates of their organization, and that's something that is part of the ethos of what we do and how we do it. So figuring out what the person sitting next to me does and how they do it can only help me understand, okay, so what do I have to do now to get services for this older adult, if you can't do it? So it's really taking the time within the teams to share information about your own organizations and what they do and how they do it.
And it sounds to me like there's a case to be made for, establishing what the purpose of the training is, and that the training in itself is not a be all and end all. It could be the beginning of conversations, and part of kind of the curation of content is also being able to, like Candy say, make space for, what else needs to happen in terms of a system support for us to be able to do to function our professed roles. And where are these missing pieces that this platform now affords us the opportunity to work through? Betsy, I don't know if that answers your question, or if you had any follow-up. Feel free to come off mute if you have an additional question, or if there's more context to your question.
Those are helpful answers. Thank you very much. Hello, Candace.
Hi.
I am working out of the Attorney General's office as the multidisciplinary team coordinator for the state. It's a fairly new statute in Kansas that went into effect in 2022. And I'm tasked with creating multidisciplinary teams across our 105 counties with 31 judicial districts. Some of them in the frontier part of Kansas are very rural, and I have a county that has no police departments, it only has a sheriff. So it's just kind of trying to, Lisa, she's on the call, she's from one of my teams there in Emporia. So I was just looking at, I'm kind of trying to figure out I am an old APS worker. I have a love for the work, but trying to bring people along and look at new and creative ways to do that when everyone feels like they're already stretched quite thin. Sometimes you don't feel like you're asking for very much, but that once a quarter to get together for 90 minutes is just almost too much sometimes. So these are helpful suggestions. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Arlene, go ahead.
So, one of the things we have a pretty large team in Nassau County, and so we have a lot of people. We're hybrid, and so I remember some folks were asking me, "Am I going to make it all in person?" And as much as I want it to be in person, they're showing up. And so, and I know some of them, it's very difficult for them to show up if they don't show up hybrid. So one of the things I've been doing is that every 3 months I have an in-person meeting and I come up with a theme, and it's usually a silly theme like Spring Fling we just had, where everybody brings a little something to eat and we can sit there and talk and eat. Because I do think it's important that you all can meet each other at some point and look at each other in the eyes, so that when you see people and you get to know them, you realize that if they say something slightly in the wrong tone, you're not going to take as much offense to it, because it's coming from a good place. Because you met them, you looked them in the eye, and you size them up, and you realize they're good eggs, and they're not being mean, or they're not being whatever. So I do think that's really important. I think it's important to, as the coordinator for the teams, to have your team members give a short presentation, like you were saying, whether it's on a calendar, like I just wrote down, keep a calendar, like I want to get them to do more and do it over and over, so they know what each team member does. And also, now that's their connection. They have somebody in that agency to call. And this is one of the things we talk about. It's like, I'm not expecting anybody on that team not to call me as the coordinator. I'm not, and the DA's office, like if you're on the team, they know that you may call them directly and say, "Hey, can you help me out with this?" So they all know they have a connection at these different agencies, which makes it, I always try to put it together as we're all getting something out of this. If you're on the team, you now have made, we have like over 15 or 20 agencies between nonprofits, attorneys, and all the local agencies. You now have a connection to each one of these agencies. So, and that means, you need training on something. Like when the DA's office presents, and those of you that know me, I'm a retired ADA. The ADA comes in, I ask them, talk to me about, I see on, you guys see on TV, like be creative. They show on the news this current scam that happened. And they just made an arrest, and it's in Nassau County. I'm like, whoa, let me call my ADA, who's got this case. And they asked them to do a presentation on it. What's this case about? And then they come back and they say what they did to investigate, so that everybody understands you have to get a subpoena. You have to have a basis for a subpoena. And now you get to understand why the DA's office is doing what they're doing and why it takes 500 years to be able to get through it. So, and what the police do. And so I just think that, know your team, and, it's just trying to, I think everybody wants to know what the other person's doing, especially law enforcement.
Yeah.
Especially law enforcement, because we see it on TV, but it's not real life. So, so that's my suggestion, and I think it's a lot of fun when you try to be a little creative.
Thanks, Arlene. One of the things that I think sometimes shows up when we work with our teams in terms of mounting cross training is this idea of paying attention to power and, just perceived or real differences in power in terms of agencies that are present. I wonder if, amongst the panelists, you have some thoughts on how do we level the playing field or make people feel more comfortable, I suppose, so to speak, to be able to optimize the training.
I think the first thing, like nobody thinks that police are into power and control whatsoever, nor you prosecutors out there. No, but seriously, having the right people and being able to, like, even in my world, right? Having the right people that can be open and accept. You can't have the person who is, in my world, the traffic officer, where everything is per se, where it happened. And if there's no question about it, run a group like this because they're not going to be open to Arlene. They're not going to be open to Maggie. It's just not going to happen. I'm not knocking it. It's just a different mentality. So, and I think that goes for all the criminal justice agencies. I don't know what Candace or Lisa think, but that's kind of where I am. Like you have to pick the right person, almost cherry pick them to
So the
put them in.
selection matters.
Yeah. Yes.
You've got to have people who are going to cooperate and leave their professional egos outside the meeting room. And it isn't always going to be predictable who that ego is, but they become apparent pretty quickly. And then there needs to be a process to bring different voices into the room. I have a couple of thoughts on this. One of the places where I see these power imbalances appearing is when you have electeds or people with a bunch of degrees after their names versus someone who's, for example, very experienced, having been a child whose mom was abused. It is the victims or the advocates who have worked with victims who know the real stories and can really put a human face on it. One of the ways you can think about leveling that playing field is by introducing a discussion around a real or hypothetical case study, and you let different people in the room talk about how they would handle, what they could bring, what they can do. Pretty soon, what becomes evident is the people with all the degrees may not have that level of experience and know the human level story. And all of a sudden, everyone has this collective awareness of, wow, look at what we're missing. Look at how powerful knowing how to talk to these people or drawing on people's real experience can be. And through activities like that don't have to be very long, you start to build relationships and overcome dynamics based on who's been to what political party or who has what degree after them. I've seen power imbalances maybe in a little different way with my judicial training. So I come in as a subject matter expert talking about elder abuse, but I'm not a judge. And so sometimes judges look at the subject matter experts as somehow, well, that might be interesting to hear about, but they don't put you on necessarily the same scale of importance or as I've really got to listen as they might a fellow judge. So co-teaching becomes a really powerful way to take care of that very quickly. And then how the rest of the faculty works with the less powerful person, real or perceived, also communicates the degree of respect and of equality. And so all of those go into dealing with different aspects of who's got power.
Thanks, Candy. And as you're talking about folks with experience and lived experiences, I wonder if any of you have any thoughts around just being able to match the complexity of content versus where the group is. And often when we're thinking about cross-training, some people might have 1 year experience, 10 years of experience, and the question then is like, do you go down to the lowest denominator, in which case someone with a more advanced kind of skill set is going to be bored or might feel like, oh, they're teaching the course as well and not taking anything from it, versus something that's so advanced that, you know, someone without that kind of base information, foundational knowledge is not going to be able to keep up. Like, where do we pitch? How do we think about pitching in an instance like that?
I think one of the things that to kind of hone in on where do we start is, you have to ask people, what do they hope to get out of this session, this training, this encounter, this meeting? And it invites people in to be, thoughtful about where they are in their learning, but also thoughtful about where they want to be in the future with their learning. So it gives them that opportunity. I also think inviting people in to tell them a little bit about themselves in the beginning, about who they are professionally, who they are as a human being in relation to the work, helps people to humanize their experience in the room with other people who might, have more degrees, might have more information, might have more years of experience, but we can always learn from one another. The one thing that I've always learned is I can learn from the youngest, littlest child because they will always be able to teach me something that I don't know. So you can always learn, and having that open-mindedness. And I think when we think about building our teams, we think about trying to embrace that sentiment so that we have that well-rounded group of people who can learn from one another. I also think inviting people in to introduce themselves in the way they would like to be referred. So I introduce myself. Would I like everyone to call me Lisa? Would I like everyone to call me Ms. Rachmuth? Would I like everyone to call me anything else? I invite people in to do that. And that opens up the room so that maybe by the time we get to someone who has a loftier thought about themselves, they might say, no one else introduced themselves as, judge, blah, blah, blah. So maybe I won't. It changes a little bit of the dynamic sometimes. I think about, for many of you in this room, Ronnie LaFaso, Dr. Ronnie, Dr. LaFaso, she has so many different names in a room that it's funny because she's Ronnie. Thank you.
All right, we are close to time, and I wanted to make sure that there was a whole chunk around design considerations that has been covered. Let me just take everyone through what we thought we wanted to offer you in terms of thinking about design considerations. One, of course, is knowing who is in the room and what their authority and role is as you're curating content and making sure that that pitch is the right one at the right level. Also understanding, as you're curating content, what to leave out, because it's not in the wheelhouse, or it could create more controversy that would detract from the initial intent of the training. Understanding what the purpose of training is and being very purposeful around what it's intended to resolve, right? We're not just coming in and spending an hour and a half or 3 hours and having it be a free fall, that the people are devoting important time out of their schedules to be there. So making sure that we're aligned to their goals, as well as Lisa said, making sure that we know what they want out of the training is important. And then finally, something that hasn't been mentioned, but that this panel has talked about quite extensively in our conversations, is accounting for historical challenges, opportunities, and partnerships. So being mindful of what journey this group has taken in terms of training, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how to account for those in the planning of trainings. I want to leave in the remaining time, and we have 2 minutes exactly, just the opportunity for all panelists to have closing thoughts, share any closing thoughts for, it could be one tip for how to design this cross training, something that you've heard that you want to reiterate today, or something that you've said that is super, super important for folks to leave behind. And as you're listening to them, we're going to put the feedback survey for today into the chat. Please take your time with it. Let's listen to the closing remarks. So let's start with Jordan.
I had one word. I'm going to steal it from a little bit here, but be creative. Creative. I really think you need to be, and you need to get out there. You need to insert yourself into this narrative as best you can, and you got to get out of your cube. Or your office. I think that's the biggest thing. Those who work in my side of the house, will respect that more than anything else. They will start to listen. And again, thank you all for coming today.
Lisa?
I the thought that comes into my mind around one thing to kind of wrap up here is the one thing we can always count on is change. So always be willing to pivot if something feels like it's not working, and always be able to try new things. Change is inevitable, so embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candy?
Well, I repeat everything that my two colleagues have said because I think each of those was really golden comment. I think my last comment maybe comes from a different place, but my comment is training isn't an event, it's a process. And it needs to be institutionalized, it needs to be repeated, it needs to be updated, and it needs to engage with as many professionals as are appropriate to the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are at time, unfortunately. I wish this conversation could go on longer, but you have everyone's contact information. Just a reminder, tomorrow we meet in a different room. So look out for that email. There is a different link to connect with us tomorrow. We look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thank you for staying on for all your participation, and a special thanks to all our speakers today. Thank you.
Bye.